They said her hair was too distracting for school, but what the principal didn't expect was the storm one student's natural curls would unleash across the country. Oak Ridge Middle School sat quietly beneath the Georgia sun, its red brick walls glowing faintly in the early afternoon heat. The schoolyard hummed with the chatter of students moving between classes, sneakers tapping on concrete, backpacks slapping lightly against small shoulders. Laughter rang out from a group of boys near the soccer field, and a gust of wind stirred the scent of freshly cut grass and sun-warmed pavement. Inside the main hallway, where the lights flickered a little too brightly, and the walls were lined with neat bulletin boards featuring smiling children and inspirational quotes, Zaria Thompson walked with quiet purpose. She was 13, tall for her age, with deep brown skin that glowed under the sun and dark, thoughtful eyes that missed very little. Her head was held high, not out of arrogance but with the gentle dignity of someone who had recently decided she would no longer shrink herself. And her hair was magnificent. Thick, coiled, and full of life. It sat in two round, proud afro puffs that bounced slightly as she walked. Each puff was tied with a red ribbon fluttering like a quiet rebellion. Zaria had spent almost 2 hours in front of the mirror that morning, parting, moisturizing, shaping, learning to love what she used to hide. She remembered a time, not long ago, when she would slick her hair back with too much gel until her scalp ached. A time when she'd beg her mother for straighteners, for extensions, for anything to make her hair normal. But something had shifted in her lately. Maybe it was that book she'd read in English class, the one about rising even when the world wants you quiet. Maybe it was her mother's voice saying, "There is power in being seen as you are." Whatever it was, Zaria had chosen her natural hair this morning. And now as she moved past rows of beige lockers, she felt both exposed and invincible. Students glanced at her as she passed. Some smiled. Others looked quickly away. A few whispered, not loudly but just enough for her to notice. She wasn't new to the feeling of being different, but today it sat heavier. The air felt strange, thick, as if something were brewing just beyond her line of sight. Her palms itched slightly. Her heart, though steady, beat a little harder than usual. She entered room 212, language arts, and slid quietly into her seat. Ms. Harrow, the kind of teacher who always wore sunflower earrings and called everyone darling, greeted her with a quick nod. Zaria opened her notebook and began to copy the quote on the board. "No one is free until we are all free." Fanny. Lou Hamer, she liked that quote. As she wrote, she became vaguely aware of someone standing in the doorway. The room didn't fall silent immediately, but like a tide pulling back before the crash, the energy changed. Students stopped mid-sentence. Pens hovered above paper. Ms. Harrow turned, eyebrows lifting in question. It was Principal Carter. Tall, square-shouldered, with silver hair and a suit that always looked slightly too stiff for a middle school, he stepped inside without speaking. His shoes made a deliberate, echoing sound against the linoleum floor. "Zaria Thompson," he said, voice clipped. She froze. Her pencil slipped slightly, leaving a smudge on the page. "Yes, sir? I need to speak with you." "Now." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Zaria glanced at Ms. Harrow, who offered a concerned look, but said nothing. She stood, spine straightening, trying to keep her expression neutral. Her heart raced now. Not wildly, but in that subtle, trembling way it does when you know something is wrong but don't understand why yet. As she followed Principal Carter out of the room, the whispers behind her felt louder, meaner. Someone muttered, "It's probably the hair." She couldn't tell who. They walked down the hallway in silence. Zaria could feel the sweat beginning to form behind her knees, the chill of the air conditioner not reaching her skin. The principal didn't look back. His strides were long, purposeful. He moved like a man already convinced he was right. They reached the front office. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A secretary looked up from her desk, eyes widening slightly at the sight of Zaria. "Inside," Principal Carter said, pushing open the door to his office. Zaria stepped in. The door clicked shut behind her. She sat across from his large wooden desk, hands folded neatly in her lap. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and paper. She noticed a Bible verse framed on the wall behind him. Train up a child in the way he should go. Principal Carter sat down, folded his hands, and looked at her with something close to stern disappointment. Then, in a voice that was calm and quiet and carried too much finality, he said, "Your hairstyle is a violation of the dress code. You are being suspended, effective immediately." Zaria blinked. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again. Outside, the sun still shone. Kids still laughed. The world went on, unaware that in one quiet office, a young girl's pride was being punished. Not for wrongdoing, but for existing as she was. The office was too quiet. Zaria sat stiffly in the chair across from Principal Carter, the leather upholstery cold against the backs of her thighs. Her backpack lay on the floor beside her feet, its zipper half open, a corner of her math workbook, sticking out like a forgotten thought. Across the desk, Principal Carter adjusted his tie, precise, practiced. Everything about him was tight and deliberate. His crisp white shirt, his salt and pepper hair combed to an exact side part, the way he aligned his pen parallel to a manila folder before speaking. He cleared his throat. "Zaria," he began, folding, his hands in front of him. "Do you know why I called you in today?" She hesitated, her fingers gripping the hem of her skirt under the desk. Was she late to class? Did she miss an assignment? "No, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He sighed, leaning back in his chair with an air of burdened authority, like a man who didn't want to do this but believed he had to. "It's your hair." The word sat in the air for a second, foreign and weighty. Zaria blinked. "My hair?" "Yes," he said, nodding once. "Your hairstyle is in violation of the student dress code. It's excessive, and it's becoming a distraction to the learning environment." A flush crept slowly up Zaria's neck. Her hands froze. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I don't understand," she finally whispered. "It's just my hair. It's natural. I didn't dye it or do anything to it." Mr. Carter tilted his head slightly, as if indulging a misunderstanding. "The volume of it," he explained, as though describing an unruly backpack. "It's not about the texture. We simply require that students maintain a neat and unobtrusive appearance. This," he gestured vaguely toward her head, "draws attention." Zaria felt a hot, prickling sensation crawl up her back. Attention? Her hair was clean, healthy, and pulled into two symmetrical puffs. She had taken so much care. She'd been proud. And now, here she was, being told it was too much, that she was too much. Mr. Carter opened the folder and slid a piece of paper across the desk. "This is your suspension letter. You're being sent home for the remainder of the day and tomorrow. Your return will be contingent on making appropriate changes to your appearance." Zaria's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the letter. The words blurred as her eyes scanned the page. Disruption, violation, non-compliant. Each line felt like a shove, like someone was trying to erase her from the room. "I don't understand," she said again, her voice catching now. "It's just hair. It's my hair." Mr. Carter's expression didn't change. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Zaria, I understand this is upsetting, but rules are rules. Every student is expected to follow them. This isn't personal." But it was personal. Zaria could feel it in the tightness of her chest. The way her heartbeat had become loud in her ears. The way his eyes never really saw her. Not as she was. Not as Zaria Thompson, student reader, budding poet, loved daughter. Just as a problem to be managed. "Can I call my mom?" she asked, swallowing around the lump in her throat. "Of course," he said, gesturing toward the phone on the desk. She stood slowly, her legs stiff, the letter clutched in her hand like it might crumble if she held it too tight. She could feel his eyes on her as she walked to the phone. Watching. Waiting. The receiver felt heavy in her hand. She dialed her mother's number by memory, each beep sounding like a countdown to something she couldn't name. "Hello?" came her mother's voice. Warm, Familiar, steady. Mama, Zaria whispered, trying not to cry. They suspended me. A beat of silence. What? Her mother said, sharp now. What for? Zaria's voice cracked. For my hair. There was no response at first, just breathing. Then a sudden, quiet fury in her mother's voice. I'm on my way. Zaria hung up and returned to the chair. Mr. Carter was already typing something into his computer as though the meeting was finished, as though the matter had been dealt with. She stared down at the letter again. Her name was at the top. Zaria, Naomi Thompson, age 13, grade 8. Reason for suspension, violation of appearance policy. That was all it took. A hairstyle. She wasn't disruptive, she wasn't disrespectful, but her existence, in its full, natural form, was labeled unacceptable. She sat there silent, while the weight of that realization settled in her bones. Her palms were sweaty, her throat was tight, and somewhere, deep in her chest, something had started to burn. Not quite anger. Not yet. But the beginning of something else. Something that wouldn't go quietly. Outside, the school bell rang for lunch. The hallway erupted with footsteps and laughter. Life continued, indifferent, but in that office a line had been crossed, and Zaria would not forget it. The doors of Oakridge Middle School burst open just after 1:30 p.m. Malika Thompson, still wearing her work ID badge and scrubs from the pediatric clinic, strode down the hallway with a presence that parted the air around her. Her steps were fast, but measured. Her lips drawn in a firm line, jaw clenched. Her eyes, usually soft and knowing, burned with a quiet fire, a mother's fury masked in composure. The receptionist stood up quickly, startled. I need to speak to Principal Carter, Malika said, voice low, almost polite, but pulsing with restrained emotion. Now. Ma'am, he's in a meeting, the woman stammered. Malika didn't stop walking. When she reached the office door, she didn't knock. She opened it. Principal Carter looked up, surprised. Mrs. Thompson, you suspended my daughter for her hair, she said, voice rising now, finally allowing the outrage to peek through. Are you serious? Principal Carter stood slowly, hands raised slightly as if to calm the situation. Please, have a seat. I understand this is upsetting. No. No, you don't understand. Malika cut in, taking a step forward. Her voice cracked, just for a second. Do you know how hard she's worked to love herself? To see herself as beautiful in a world that keeps telling her she's not enough? Carter blinked, startled. Malika placed her palms on his desk, breathing hard. You call her hair a distraction? That's not a dress code violation, that's erasure. There was a silence between them, heavy and unmoving. She shook her head. I'm taking my daughter home, and you'll be hearing from someone besides me. Without waiting for a reply, Malika turned and walked out. At home, the walls were too quiet. Malika closed the front door gently behind her and let out a shaky breath. The smell of lavender and cocoa butter still lingered faintly in the hallway, Zaria's scent, but the warmth of their home felt dim today, like something precious had been stolen and replaced with silence. She climbed the stairs slowly. Zaria's bedroom door was cracked open. Malika pushed it gently with her fingertips. Zaria was curled, on her bed, her back to the door. Her shoes were still on, but her backpack lay untouched on the floor. One of her puffs had loosened, frizzing slightly where she'd rubbed her face against the pillow. Her hands clutched something, tightly. Malika stepped inside. Z, she said softly. Zaria didn't move at first. Her shoulders trembled just once. Then slowly she turned. Her cheeks were wet, her nose red, but her eyes, those deep brown eyes, were wide with something heavier than sadness, shame, confusion, anger that had no place to go. I didn't do anything wrong, Zaria said. Her voice was small. I know, baby, Malika whispered, kneeling beside the bed. Zaria sat up and revealed what she had been holding, her journal. A simple purple notebook covered in glittery stickers, corners worn soft with time. Malika gently took it from her hands and opened to the page Zaria had been staring at. It was covered in large, looping handwriting, decorated with stars and flowers drawn in pen. My hair is magic. My hair is strong. My hair is beautiful. My hair is me. Malika stared at it, blinking hard. Suddenly a memory hit her like a wave. Zaria was 7, sitting on the floor in front of the TV, legs crossed, a bowl of dry cereal in her lap. The screen was playing back-to-back ads, one after the other, blonde girls with pin-straight hair flipping it in slow motion, laughing, smiling, always being chosen. Malika had been folding laundry on the couch when she heard her daughter say quietly, "Mommy, is my hair ugly?" The question had been so gentle, so innocent. It had cracked Malika wide open. She remembered turning off the TV and sitting behind her daughter, slowly parting her curls with oil-covered fingers. "No, baby. Your hair is like a crown. It's soft like clouds and strong like roots. Don't ever let anyone make you think it should be anything else." Now, years later, here they were. Malika ran her fingers through Zaria's puff tenderly. "I told you once that your hair was a crown," she said. "And it still is. Don't you dare take it off just because someone else can't see it." Zaria nodded, but her lips quivered. "I was proud," she whispered. "For the first time, I was really proud today." Malika leaned in and wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling her close. They stayed there, mother and child, surrounded by posters of black ballerinas and Maya Angelou quotes and the lingering sound of a heart trying to rebuild. "You have every right to be proud," Malika said. "You were born to stand out, not shrink." Zaria clung to her mother's warmth as if anchoring herself. The sting of humiliation still lingered, but beneath it, something else began to grow again, something familiar. Strength. The next morning, the sun rose warm and indifferent. A mockingbird sang from the tree outside Zaria's window, oblivious to the ache still sitting heavy in her chest. She stayed in bed longer than usual, curled beneath her quilt, scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. Her suspension meant no classes, no friends, no routine. Just stillness. But by mid-morning, a message pinged into her inbox, a direct message on her school's group chat app. "Hey, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." Layla. Zaria blinked. Layla was quiet in class. The kind of girl who always had perfect binders and never raised her voice. She wore long box braids, often tucked into a bun or pinned back neatly with barrettes. Zaria didn't know her well. She typed back slowly, "Thanks. I still don't get why it was a big deal. It's just my hair." A minute later, Layla replied, "Same thing happened to me a few weeks ago. Not as bad, but Mr. Carter called me in and told me my braids were too long and too dramatic. Asked if I could come back with a more neutral look." Zaria sat up, heart thudding softly. "What? That's not in the rules, is it?" Layla responded, "Nope. I checked. There's nothing about length or style, just vague stuff like professional appearance, whatever that means." Zaria stared at the screen, mind turning over slowly. She hadn't been the first. Later that day, her mother came home earlier than usual. Her eyes were sharp, focused. "Zaria," she said, holding up her phone. "Something's going on at that school." Zaria looked up from the couch, startled. "What do you mean?" Malika handed her the phone. On the screen was a grainy screenshot, an email thread between staff members at Oak Ridge Middle. The subject line read, "Read dress code infractions, March updates." The image had clearly been forwarded multiple times before landing in a parent group chat. At the bottom of the thread was a message from an assistant vice principal. "You should have seen the hair on this one. Looked like a lion's mane. We're gonna need a fire extinguisher soon, Lowell." And another line, right after, from a gym coach. "Maybe we start handing out brushes with report cards next quarter. Gotta tame the wild before it gets worse, ha ha ha." Zaria read the words twice, then a third time, her stomach tightening with each pass. Wild. Tame. Fire extinguisher. The laughter, the casual, cruel undertone, made her skin crawl. She looked up. Are they talking about me? Her mother's silence was answer enough. By that evening, a small storm was beginning to gather. Malika sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open and a notepad beside it, filled with names and numbers. A group of mothers, some she knew well, others only by name, were texting nonstop. My daughter wears a twist out. She was told it was messy. My son was told his locks made him look intimidating. They said my baby's cornrows were gang-related. He's 10. Each message lit up the phone like a flare. Malika called one of the women, Tanya James, mother of an 8th grader named Malik. They spoke for nearly an hour. Tanya's voice cracked halfway through. I told Malik to be proud of his hair, she said. Told him our history was in those curls, and now he's asking me if he should cut it short so he won't get in trouble. I can't even look him in the eye. Malika scribbled notes, her jaw clenched tight. This wasn't about Zaria anymore. It never had been. It was a pattern, one that had gone quiet too long. That night, Zaria sat on her bed with her laptop open. She read the leaked email thread again. Then again. Each time she noticed a new phrase that twisted deeper into her ribs, a new layer of cruelty she'd missed before. She pulled her journal onto her lap. April 18, they called my hair wild, said it was a problem to be fixed, but they weren't talking about my hair. They were talking about me. She paused, pen hovering, then continued. They're scared of what they don't understand. And maybe they laugh because it's easier than listening. But I'm not going to shrink. I'm not going to hide. This is bigger than me now. She drew a tiny crown beside the words, her own quiet rebellion. Then she shut the journal and opened her browser. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly. Maybe answers, maybe stories like hers. Instead, she found something else. A photo. A news article from last year. Another black girl in another town, suspended for wearing Bantu knots to school. The headline read, School apologizes after hair discrimination. Sparks outcry. Zaria stared at the picture. The girl looked about her age and she was smiling, not small or nervous but wide and proud, like someone who had just won a war she didn't ask to fight. Zaria reached for her phone and took a photo of her own reflection. Afro puffs, still strong, still bold. She posted it quietly, with a caption. They tried to call this wild. I call it powerful. Lettuce abuse, she didn't expect much. But within minutes the likes began to pour in, and comments. From strangers, from classmates, from people she hadn't spoken to in months. And beneath it all, one reply from Layla. I got you. Sis Zaria smiled. Small at first, then bigger. Something was shifting, and this time it wasn't shame, it was momentum. That night, after Zaria had gone to bed, Malika sat at the kitchen table in the half-dark. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Her hands hovered over her phone. Her thumb trembled slightly above the post button. On the screen, a photo of Zaria's suspension letter filled the top half. Below it, she had typed just one sentence. My daughter was suspended for being herself. She stared at the screen for a full minute. Then she pressed post. She didn't know what would come of it. Maybe a few likes. Maybe some parents from the group chat would reshare it. Maybe it would just drift unnoticed into the digital noise. But she couldn't stay silent anymore. Not when her daughter had been humiliated for something she should have been celebrated for. By sunrise, the post had been shared over 9,000 times. By noon, that number had tripled. Malika woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications, DMs, texts, tags. She rubbed her eyes and sat up in bed, blinking at the light of the screen. BuzzFeed News wants to speak to you. CNN reporter here. Can we quote your story? Activist R. Truth Black retweeted your post, said, Enough is enough. Local protest. Planned Friday at 10 a.m. Bring signs. She sat frozen for a moment, then stood up, slowly, like the ground beneath her had shifted overnight. Zaria was already awake, seated cross-legged on the living room floor, eyes glued to her phone. Mom, she said breathlessly. We're on the Explore page. Her voice held equal parts awe and disbelief. Everyone's talking about it like Everyone. They're saying my name. She looked up, eyes wide and wet. Not in a bad way. In a real way. Malika crossed the room and knelt beside her daughter, cupping her face gently. People are finally listening, baby, she whispered. And they should have been, all along. By the end of the day, reporters had shown up at their doorstep. News vans parked up the street. Neighbors peeked through blinds. When Malika stepped outside to get the mail, a young black journalist from a local station approached cautiously, mic in hand, eyes kind. "Mrs. Thompson, can you share why you decided to speak out?" Malika looked into the camera. Her voice didn't shake. "Because my daughter deserves to exist in her fullness. And no child, black, brown, or otherwise, should be punished for how they show up in the world." She paused, then added, "They called her hair a distraction. But the only distraction now is the injustice of it." That clip aired on 5 networks by nightfall. Friday morning, the school looked different. It was still the same red brick building, the same flag flapping in the breeze, the same parking lot with its crooked yellow lines, but now dozens of people lined the sidewalk out front. Some held signs, "Let black kids be kids." Our hair, our heritage. Education, not erasure. Some were students, some were parents, some were teachers, quietly, nervously, and some were strangers, local activists who had driven in from other counties to stand in solidarity. Zaria clutched her mother's hand as they approached. Her heart thumped so loud she thought people might hear it. A woman with a megaphone, tall, dark-skinned, her afro shaped like a halo, called out, "What do we want?" "Justice," the crowd responded. "When do we want it? Now." Zaria blinked hard, overwhelmed. She had never felt more seen, more vulnerable, or more powerful. A girl from her math class ran up to her and threw her arms around her. "You're so brave," she whispered. Zaria shook her head. "I was just tired." The girl nodded. "Yeah, me too." Inside the school, blinds were being pulled shut. Principal Carter watched from his office window, his jaw tight. He turned to face the room where the school board had gathered. 8 members seated stiffly around a long oak table. Papers were stacked neatly in front of them, water bottles untouched. The superintendent, a wiry man with thin spectacles, spoke first. "This is getting out of hand. It's gone national," a woman muttered. Another board member leaned forward. "We need to issue a statement." "No," someone snapped. "We do that. We're admitting fault." Principal Carter crossed his arms. The dress code was established to maintain order. There are expectations in a learning environment. A long pause. The room was heavy with something unspoken. And then finally a younger board member, a black woman with box braids and a fire in her eyes, broke the silence. Order should never come at the cost of identity. This wasn't about policy. It was about control, and you're losing it. No one answered her, but the silence spoke volumes. By evening, videos from the protest had spread across TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Celebrities began reposting them. A famous poet tweeted, "Black girls shouldn't have to be brave just to be themselves." Zaria read the words again and again, stunned. Then another message came in, this time from the office of a civil rights attorney. They offered to represent her family pro bono. Malika's breath caught in her chest as she read the email aloud. Zaria sat back on the couch, stunned. She looked down at her hands, then at her curls, still proudly puffed out at her. "Sides like wings," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Malika smiled gently. "Sometimes change starts when we don't mean it to. But you opened the door." Outside, the last of the protesters were packing up. The sun had dipped low, casting golden light across the pavement. A little girl, no older than 7, walked by holding her mother's hand. She looked up at Zaria, wide-eyed, and waved. Zaria waved back, heart full and breaking all at once. Something had begun, and no one, not Principal Carter, not the board, not the silence, could stop it now. The following week, the firestorm had only grown. Media vans still lingered near the school. Hashtags still trended. More students began wearing their natural hair in proud, defiant styles: coils, curls, locks, twist-outs. The movement was visible, breathing, multiplying. And yet the school remained silent. No official apology, no statement, just carefully chosen words about ongoing internal review, as if Zaria's dignity were a typo being quietly spell-checked. But then, late one night, when the sky outside was soaked in moonlight and the world seemed hushed, Malika's email pinged. Subject line: "You need to see this." No name, no signature. Just a message with an attachment. She hesitated, pulse quickening. The file was short, just under 2 minutes of grainy security footage. Malika clicked play. Inside the frame was a familiar classroom, desks in rows, a dry erase board. The clock on the wall read 10:43 a.m., and there in the middle of the frame sat Zaria. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't dancing, she wasn't causing chaos. She was reading, head bent, elbows tucked in. Her afro puffed out like a soft halo, catching the overhead light. Around her, students whispered or jotted down notes. The classroom looked normal, calm, peaceful. At 10:45, the door opened. Principal Carter stepped in, glanced directly at Zaria, and motioned her out with a stiff jerk of his head. The footage ended. Malika sat frozen, her hand pressed to her chest. It wasn't a disruption. It had never been a disruption. The story they told, the justification they gave, had been a lie. The next morning, Malika posted the video. "Here's the disruption my daughter was suspended for." That's all she wrote. The clip spread like wildfire. Even the skeptical voices, the ones who had quietly wondered if Zaria might have been acting out, began to vanish beneath the wave of truth. News anchors replayed it. Activists added it to threads. Teachers commented in hushed solidarity, and then, just 2 days later, another leak. This time, a document. Blurry at first, then reposted in crystal clear clarity by a former school employee on social media. Oak Ridge Middle School Dress Code Addendum. February revision. Effective immediately. Underlined in cold, sanitized language. Hairstyles that cause unnecessary attention or classroom distraction are prohibited, including but not limited to excessive volume, unnatural patterns, or styles that obscure facial visibility. Another line buried near the bottom. Administration reserves the right to determine professional grooming standards on a case-by-case basis. There was no mention of specific hairstyles, but every student knew what they meant. Afros, locks, bantu knots, cornrows, twist-outs. The policy hadn't been enforced broadly, only selectively, quietly, strategically. Suddenly, parents across the district began checking their own copies of the handbook. Nowhere in the publicly distributed version was this revised addendum listed. It had been hidden, folded into the system like a knife between pages. Malika sat at the kitchen table that night, the printed policy in her hand, her jaw tight. Across from her, Zaria stared in stunned silence. She'd gone quiet since the video surfaced. No more tears. No more outbursts. Just still. "They planned this," she finally said, her voice small. "They changed the rules without telling us. They made me feel like I was wrong for something they secretly decided to punish." Her mother reached for her hand. They were hoping no one would notice. Zaria pulled her hand back gently. "They didn't expect me to fight back." News outlets erupted. Leaked footage undermines school's claims. Black students silenced under secret hair policy. Is your school's code of conduct really neutral? Legal experts weighed in. Civil rights organizations began preparing filings. And behind the scenes, other students, braver now, started sharing their own footage, their own warnings, their own memories of being told their hair was unruly, distracting, too bold. What had happened to Zaria was not an isolated act. It was a symptom of something much older, much deeper, a thread running beneath desks and behind closed doors for years, only now beginning to unravel in public view. The school board finally released a statement, flat, sanitized, carefully worded. We are reviewing all aspects of our appearance policy to ensure fairness and equity. No apology, no accountability. But the silence from Principal Carter was louder than anything else. He didn't show up for work that week. Rumors swirled. Some said he was on leave. Others said he'd been asked to resign quietly. No one knew, for sure. What they did know was this: a system designed to police black identity had been dragged into the light, and it had blinked, hard against the sun. That night, Zaria returned to her journal. Her handwriting was neater now, slower, like she was carving the words into stone. May 2, they called it a policy, said it was about learning, not punishment. But I saw the truth. They wanted silence that looked like obedience. They wanted control disguised as professionalism. She paused, then added, but they forgot. We come from people who don't stay quiet. And my hair? It's not just hair. It's history. It's pride. It's resistance. It's mine. She closed the journal and looked in the mirror. The girl looking back wasn't afraid anymore. She was awake, and that was far more dangerous than any distraction. The sun beat down gently on the pavement outside Oakridge Middle School, golden and kind, as if the universe had chosen this day to offer warmth and solidarity. It was a Saturday now, 2 weeks after Zaria's suspension, and the crowd was bigger than ever, more than a protest. It looked like a gathering, a congregation of people drawn together by shared outrage, shared hope, shared fire. Families came with handmade signs. Children with beads in their hair stood on tiptoe. Elders brought lawn chairs, fanning themselves with programs printed by local activists. Across the front lawn stood a small wooden podium with a microphone. Behind it, a young girl fidgeted quietly, her palms damp. Zaria wore her hair in 2 towering afro puffs that stretched toward the sky like twin declarations. Her mother stood just behind her, squeezing her shoulder gently, silently. Are you ready? Malika asked. Zaria inhaled, held it, nodded once. Then she stepped forward. The microphone crackled slightly as she adjusted it. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through a row of trees behind her. Zaria reached into her pocket and unfolded a piece of lined notebook paper, her journal page. She didn't look up at first, just read. They called it a policy, said it was about learning, not punishment. But I saw the truth. She paused, steadying her breath. A bird chirped nearby like a sign. They wanted silence that looked like obedience. They wanted control disguised as professionalism. But my hair isn't the problem. Your discomfort is. A ripple went through the crowd. Subtle, electric. Zaria looked up now, eyes locked with the sea of faces before her. Some were wet with tears. Some clenched fists. Some just nodded, slowly, as if their own truths were being read aloud. My name is Zaria Thompson, she said, her voice growing stronger, more sure. And I was suspended for wearing the hair I was born with. The hair I love. The hair that tells the story of my ancestors. Someone in the crowd murmured. That's right. Zaria gripped the edges of the podium. They said my afro was a distraction, but the only thing distracting was their fear. Fear of what I represent when I stand tall, when I walk proud, when I refuse to shrink. She looked toward the school building, those red bricks that once felt towering and cold. Now they felt small. This school tried to make me feel small, but instead, they made me loud. They made me brave. There was silence again, quiet, reverent. And then it began. One person clapped, then 2, then 20. Then the whole lawn erupted. Zaria blinked back tears as cheers rang out like thunder. A chant rose from somewhere near the back. We love you, Zaria. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Malika rushed to her side and wrapped her in a hug. For a long time, they stayed like that, mother and daughter, two silhouettes against a backdrop of noise and love. After the speech, a line formed. Strangers wanted to hug her, students wanted photos, reporters asked questions. But Zaria felt light. Not like a celebrity, not like a symbol, just like herself. And for once, that was enough. Inside the school, however, the fallout had only just begun. In the following days, pressure mounted. Petitions flooded the district's email inboxes. Civil rights lawyers sent formal notices. The Department of Education announced an official investigation into the school's policies. Then, the final shoe dropped. Principal Carter resigned. News came quietly in an early morning announcement tucked into a district-wide newsletter. Due to recent events, Principal Carter has chosen to step down. We thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavors. No fanfare, no explanation, but everyone knew. Justice didn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it walked in quiet and undeniable, wearing truth like armor. Weeks later, the school board publicly reversed the hidden dress code policy. They held a town hall. This time, they invited students to speak. Zaria declined. She didn't need to convince them anymore. She had already said everything that mattered. Instead, she sat on her front porch that evening with Malika, watching the sunset, a cool breeze, tugging gently at the ends of her hair. "Do you think it's over?" she asked softly. Malika shook her head. "Not over, but different now. Because you showed them we won't stay silent." Zaria leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I just wanted to be me." And that, Malika said, was revolutionary. Few months later, Zaria's story appeared in a national magazine, a special issue titled Voices of Change. She didn't read the article out loud. She didn't have to. Instead, she folded it gently and slid it into her journal. Right between the page where she had once written, "They called it a distraction," and the one where she had written, "But now the whole country is watching," and just beneath it, in her neatest handwriting, "My hair is not the enemy. My truth is not negotiable." The days that followed Zaria's speech moved like the slow turning of dawn, quiet at first but unmistakably brightening. The voices that had once been whispers behind closed doors were now full-throated and public. Parents, teachers, students, people who had once stayed silent began to share their own stories. Stories of rules that weren't written, punishments that didn't make sense, and warnings cloaked in politeness but sharpened with bias. Zaria had cracked something open, and the system couldn't put it back together. On a crisp Thursday morning, just before homeroom would have started, an email went out to every parent in the district. Subject: Administrative update. It was short, barely a paragraph long. Effective immediately, Principal Leonard Carter has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation into policy enforcement practices. We are committed to ensuring that Oak Ridge Middle School is a place of inclusion, equity, and respect. There was no mention of Zaria, no public naming of the wrong done. But the message was clear: Carter would not return to his post. And something, at last, was shifting. Later that week, Malika received an unexpected phone call from the school superintendent's office. They wanted to meet. In person. She hesitated at first. Her trust in the district had been shattered, and no apology could undo the days of humiliation her daughter had endured. But Zaria, now calm and steady in a way that seemed far beyond her years, nodded gently. "Let them say it to my face," she said. So they went. The superintendent was a tall, soft-spoken man with gray at his temples and regret in his eyes. He didn't look at a script. He didn't fumble for excuses. "I want to say," face to face he began, "that the district failed you." He turned to Zaria. "You were punished not for what you did, but for who you are, and for that I am deeply sorry." Then he slid a printed letter across the table, an official apology, signed by the board, published on the school website that afternoon. It read, in part, "We recognize that our policy and its enforcement reflected a lack of cultural sensitivity and fairness. We are revising our dress code in partnership with community leaders and student voices, and we apologize to Zaria Thompson and her family for the harm caused. Zaria read it silently. Then, without a word, she folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. The new dress code was released 2 weeks later. This time, it was simple, clear, free of vague terms like excessive volume or professional appearance. The first sentence read, "All hairstyles, including natural, protective, and cultural expressions, are welcomed at Oak Ridge Middle School." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Zaria didn't return to Oak Ridge right away. She took her classes, remotely just for a while, not out of fear but out of need, to breathe, to think, to be without constantly being watched. In that time, something else happened. The phone calls started. Journalists, podcasters, youth organizations, civil rights leaders. They wanted to know her story, and she told it, not with bitterness but with clarity, with purpose, with a voice that had grown stronger in the very storm meant to quiet it. Then one afternoon, Malika came home to find a thick envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Just Zaria's name, handwritten in blue ink. Inside, a scholarship letter, the Ella Baker Youth Justice Award, offered by a National Civil Rights Foundation, presented each year to a student who sparked systemic change through nonviolent activism. Zaria sat on the couch and stared at the words. She saw something wrong, the letter read, and spoke up. Her courage has lit a path for others. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she smiled softly and whispered, "They heard me." The final page in her journal came weeks later. She sat in her room, the letter and apology tucked in a box nearby. Her afro was free and glorious, no longer an act of resistance, but simply a part of her. She wrote, "They wanted me quiet, but I grew louder, not with noise but with truth, not with anger but with purpose, and now no one can pretend they don't see us." She set the pen down. Outside, the world felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally been acknowledged. Her story was never just about hair. It was about power, pride, presence, and most of all, the right to be fully, unapologetically seen. Time passed, not fast, not like it does in movies. Real time, the kind that heals in waves, not straight lines. The story of Zaria Thompson didn't disappear with the next news cycle. It lingered. It settled into conversations in living rooms, classrooms, and city council chambers. It made teachers pause before enforcing a rule. It made parents ask questions they hadn't before. It made other young girls feel just a little taller in their own skin. Because now, there was proof. The world could be challenged by someone it tried to shrink. Zaria didn't call herself brave. She didn't want speeches or medals. All she had ever wanted was to show up, to class, to life, to herself, without having to apologize for her reflection. And that desire, so simple, so human, had unearthed a system designed to punish difference. With discipline, she'd been called a distraction. Now she was a movement. Some nights Malika still replayed the first meeting in her head. The tight office, the way the principal never made eye contact, the word disruption tossed around like fact, and Zaria sitting beside her, fists clenched in her lap, a storm building in silence. What would have happened, Malika sometimes wondered, if she hadn't posted that photo? If she'd accepted their reasoning, let it fade into another line in the handbook, another girl told to adjust, or change, or try again tomorrow. But she had chosen to speak, and her daughter had chosen to stand. Spring arrived early that year. It came with soft breezes and cherry blossoms opening along the sidewalks, and a sun that rose with a little more warmth each morning. It was on one of those mornings, calm and golden, that Zaria stood in front of her mirror again. Same curls, same coils, same crown. There were no announcements to be made, no press waiting outside, no microphone to hold, just a new day, and a hallway waiting to be walked like a runway. She slipped her backpack over one shoulder, smoothed the sides of her hair with a bit of cream, and smiled at her reflection, not for anyone else, but for herself. And then she stepped outside. The air was cool but kind, Light filtered through the trees, casting gold onto the pavement. Her shoes tapped softly against the sidewalk. She didn't rush. She didn't shrink. Every step forward was a whisper of defiance. She passed a neighbor who waved. A little girl in braids pointed and smiled. And then, just before reaching the school's front gates, she paused. The building still looked the same. Red bricks, iron fence, the bell tower overhead. But something felt different. The weight she once carried at those gates, the invisible tug of shame of wondering if she'd be punished for being herself, was gone. In its place, lightness. She walked through the entrance like it belonged to her. Because it did. Inside, other students were chatting and laughing. One girl had thick locks piled into a bun. A boy wore a durag without fear. A teacher, one of the few who had quietly supported Zaria, nodded as she passed. Nothing had to be said. The change had taken root. That afternoon, Zaria sat in English class. The teacher handed out a writing prompt. "What does freedom mean to you?" She didn't hesitate. She began writing in smooth, steady strokes. Freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like wearing your hair the way it grows. Sometimes it's walking into a room and knowing you belong without explanation. Sometimes it's choosing to speak when others expect you to stay silent. She paused, then added, "Silencing. Someone's identity will never create peace, only resistance, and sometimes the smallest voices spark the loudest change." Later, as the school day ended and students filed out into the fading afternoon sun, Zaria stepped through the doorway with her head held high. The sunlight caught the curve of her curls, framing her like the closing lines of a poem. No one stopped her. No one asked her to change. No one dared to suggest she was a problem to be fixed. And in that small, quiet moment, barely a breath in the grand story of the world, something monumental happened. A girl simply walked forward, exactly as she was. And the world, for once, moved aside. Because the fight for dignity starts small, and sometimes it begins with something as simple as hair, and ends with something as powerful as truth.